Oh, if you guys have phones, can you put them on silent? Thank you.
I think we're live.
Good evening. We're live, right? We're live. Good evening. I'm Farhat Rahman, the past president of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, Ottawa chapter. Welcome, bienvenue, tanse, anin, and salams to everyone who is joining us today. We acknowledge that we are welcoming you from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe, who are the traditional keepers of this land since times immemorial. In doing so, we are committed to our obligation as settlers to respect and affirm the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples and work to repair the harms perpetrated for generations upon the Indigenous communities. We acknowledge the ongoing trauma colonialism continues to inflict on the First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples, and pledge to work towards real conciliation. Thank you to the Ottawa Writers Festival for all of your past, present, and future support, and in facilitating this popular event once again. CCMW Ottawa welcomes you all to possibly our 23rd annual Books and Biryani gathering. Earlier this month, we recognized another Canadian Muslim writer, Murray Hogbin's book, Minarets on the Horizon by Mawenzi House, which revealed for Canadians the early lives and culture of pioneering Muslims in Canada. It's a very interesting read. Today, you are in for a treat when you will hear from a young Canadian Muslim writer whose work featured today is titled Praying to the West, a personal travelogue-cum-memoir that details how Muslims colonized the Americas. So without further ado, let me introduce our polymath moderator, Dr. Ferrukh Faruqui. She's a member of the Ottawa Writers Festival and a longtime member and current vice president of the Ottawa chapter of CCMW. Farukh is a voracious reader, mom to 3 wonderful children, and Imran's partner in life, song, and Urdu poetry, and a longtime physician and a freelance writer to boot. Welcome, Farukh, and please introduce us to, using your description for Omar, the kinetic, and I might add, the itinerant author, Omar Mouallem. Over to you, Farukh.
Thank you so much, Farhat. Good evening, everyone. Salam, peace, pay, and shalom. Thanks for joining us for Books and Biryani 2021. I hope that you've all managed to procure a plate at home. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome Omar Mouallem, a nice guy originally from High Prairie and now living in Edmonton, who just can't stay still. Omar hit the ground running way before most of us even considered our futures, and he hasn't stopped since. He's a filmmaker and freelance journalist who's been published around the globe and is the winner of 3 national magazine awards. Before that, he spent a decade on the hip-hop scene as the now retired successful rapper A.O.K., whose 2008 debut album is called If You Don't Buy the CD, The Terrorist Wins. A.O.K. stands, I believe, I was very curious about this, for assault of knowledge. And by the way, his just released book, Praying to the West, is exactly that. A tangible assault of knowledge, a dazzling portal into the protean manifestations of Islam from South America and the Caribbean to California, Chicago, Quebec City, and points beyond. He takes us to meet Mayan Muslims in the Chiapas, to the Iranian diaspora in Los Angeles, and to the immigrants who established the Midnight Sun Mosque in Inuvik, 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Fun fact, Praying to the West here it is again, debuted as the #1 book about terrorism on Amazon. No, really, it did. And, seriously, Amazon, get your act together. After the pandemic hit, Omar hit back by establishing the stupendously successful online Pandemic University for Writers. He calls himself the fake dean of PanU. Are you still with me? Because there's more.
I'm with you.
He's now a mentor at the University of King's College MFA program in creative nonfiction. And CBC Gem has just released Burger Baron, his joyful ode to the Lebanese immigrants, including his parents, who served up iconic mushroom burgers to small-town Albertans for decades. Omar and his wife are the parents of daughter Noé, I hope I got that right, who figures largely in your book and travels, though you had to leave her behind, and his son Ilyas. He has 2 cats, Darwin and Orwell. Orwell once entered a cat pageant, but I still don't know if he won.
We entered him.
Maybe he was a runner-up. Yeah, maybe he was.
It was not his choice.
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in welcoming Omar Mouallem.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that's a real deal fabulous bio. Thank you for that. I'll have to steal that from you and put it on my website or something. Usually people just, go with whatever they read off the back of the book. Thank you for that. That was very kind. You really did your research there. I will fact check on one thing. I was never a successful rapper. I was just a rapper who did it because he wanted to do it. And no one ever asked me. No one ever asked me to put out an album or do anything like that. But anyway, it was a fun time while it lasted.
I'm sure. So, Omar, we're going to be talking about Praying to the West today. So, I think if we wanted to start with a reading, we can start with that, and then we can get into a bit of a discussion. And we will have time for Q&A towards the end. So please, everyone, think about questions and comments and put them into the chat. And remember to buy your copy of Praying to the West from Perfect Books.
And I will warn everyone now, my biryani is on the way. So probably midway, there's going to be a delicious interruption in my life. So, okay, I'm going to read from the top of the intro because, why not? The first time I learned I was Muslim was in preschool. During an excursion to a pizzeria, which is what passed for a field trip in my hometown of High Prairie, Alberta, I consumed a few morsels of ham. My mom arrived with the other parents to pick me up from class, and I began to sing the praises of Hawaiian pizza. She cut me off with a gasp. "You're Muslim," she said loudly enough for my teacher to hear. "Muslims don't eat pork." Abstaining from pork could be the first law of the 5 pillars of Western Islam. Unlike the actual pillars, pray daily, pay alms, fast through Ramadan, pilgrimage to Mecca, and declare Muhammad as a messenger of the one true God, the pillars of Western Islam are defined by what you don't do. Eat pork, celebrate Christmas, drink alcohol, gamble, and date. It's safe to say that I'll probably never complete the first set of pillars, but the second I dutifully observed until mid-adolescence. Then I pushed them over, one by one, over the course of 10 years, and the first to go up was the last to fall. And that brings me to the second time I learned I was Muslim. A few years ago, at the age of 30, I outed myself from the atheist closet by eating pork on a Food Network show with millions of viewers. I immediately regretted it and decided to inform my mom before one of my relatives got to her. I tried to explain my disposition, but again, she cut me off. "You were born Muslim and you'll die Muslim." I don't think she meant it as a threat, and certainly not as an offense, but that's how I interpreted it. See, after the Twin Towers fell on September 11th, 2001, 2 days short of my 16th birthday, I started becoming hostile to structural authority, government, institutional, and had as much to do with how I wanted to be viewed than any firm views that I might have held as a writer and rapper. Throughout my 20s, I refashioned myself as a professional skeptic in magazines, radio, and music, and I routinely disparaged religion and the religious. Yet, try as I might, I've never been able to shake free from the larger Muslim body, the Ummah. When my parents pressured my now wife and I to sign a Sharia marriage contract to give them peace of mind, I was a begrudging Muslim. When Janae, my wife, when her friends or parents of previous girlfriends warned that I might become an abuser or would absolutely dump them to marry a brown girl in time, I was an ashamed Muslim. When a literati type cornered me at a party to ask why Muslims don't condemn Muslim terrorists, I was a polite Muslim. And when the same man years later accused, until recently, Muslim identity was imposed on me, but I feel different about my religious upbringing in the era of ISIS and Trumpism, Rohingya and Uyghur genocides, ethno-nationalism. I'm compelled to reclaim the thing that makes me a target. I've begun to examine Islam closely with an eye for how it has shaped my values, politics, and connections to my roots. No doubt Islam has a place within me, but do I have a place within it? Is there a seat in the Ummah for non-believers? Thank you.
Wow. When I started
and in search for an answer, I wrote the book. Sorry, go ahead. Left everyone on a cliffhanger. So.
Yeah, you did. But when I read this book, I normally I read really fast. I'm a fast reader, but I read slowly, and I backtracked and I went back to different parts and things because there's just so much here, Omar. That's the first thing that I noticed is like every chapter and every sort of segments of chapters can cycle off and become their own books. So I mean, the amount of research
and it was tempting as it was. Sometimes instead of a chapter.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a question that is coming to me from your chapter on the Muslims in the Chiapas, and you talk there about how Islam improved their lives in a way, but you also wrote that religious colonization that severs people from their roots can leave behind a legacy of confusion and misery. And then you go on to say, heritage is self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is the most profound source of self-worth, resuscitating what's been lost: culture, language, religion, land. So what is your heritage? And what self-knowledge has it brought to you?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. I think that for a very long time, I wanted to deny that Islam was a part of my heritage. I would say that it was, maybe a part of my upbringing at best, right? And I would say things like that to kind of account for, Muslim customs that I might participate in, or Muslim, holidays or time, and also with sort of the politicization, vilification of Muslim people, I've just become naturally more protective, guarded, and strangely protective of, often of beliefs that I don't hold myself, but protective of people who do hold those beliefs, because those people are my family. Those people are still my community. Whether or not I have, sort of traditional Muslim beliefs, whether or not I am, a believer, I'm still part of a Muslim community, and I'm still a part of it. And so, with that sort of realization, and to kind of, like I said, reclaim the thing that makes me a target, instead of as something in my past, I think I've started to embrace the term heritage, because heritage is something that is a lot more ingrained. It's more powerful, stubborn. Sometimes it is a part of your, it's a part of your DNA in a way. And I think that is true. of Islam. I think that's true of a lot of things. I mean, I think that Christianity is a large part of my heritage because I grew up in Canada, in a country that has a lot of customs and laws and holidays that are based on a Christian calendar. So Christianity is also a part of my heritage. But, Islam was the one that I was cognizant is a part of my heritage, and yet for many years I think tried to push it out. And so this book is part embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress sometimes, isn't it? What we are, who we decide we are.
Yeah. Self-knowledge is always a work in progress, and one's identity, and it only becomes richer with age, right?
Yeah. As being someone who's quite a bit older than you, well, and I think we can agree that as we grow older, we keep growing, and who we are keeps evolving. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You write that the idea for the book came to you while you were in Inuvik. Can you tell us how you actually conceived of the book?
Sure.
And why writing it mattered so much to you? I mean, you're a writer and you love to write.
Yeah.
But why did writing this book matter so much to you? And what role did your daughter, Noe, play in it?
Yeah. It came earlier, but what came to me in Inuvik was as a journey through mosques. It seems so obvious now that in order to write a book about the breadth of Muslim experiences in the West, that I would be spending a lot of time in mosques. But that actually didn't occur to me at the time. I was still very early in the research phase, and I just happened to be in Inuvik on an assignment, or a travel assignment, and then I, stumbled into a mosque, and then it became part of the book, and it also, it gave me the idea for a framework where instead of focusing on communities per se, because or a city per se, because we say Muslim community, but it is such a terrible term because there is no one Muslim community. Even in a city like Edmonton, there are many, many Muslim communities, but a mosque is a Muslim community. And so it occurred to me that would probably be the best way to tell this story, to home in on one mosque per chapter, and then kind of in concentric circles give the broader picture of that community and the communities around them, how they interact, what are the successes, triumphs, challenges, conflicts, that kind of stuff. Now, the idea of the book itself, I just was so tired. I was just so tired of the mainstreaming of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is, as old as Islam. But
and just to interject for a minute, a lot of people, I read comment sections, I know I shouldn't, but people say Islamophobia doesn't exist. It's not even a thing. What are
exactly. They will absolutely, they will deny that it is even a concept, that you can't be irrationally or disproportionately afraid of Islam because Islam is, a genuine threat. And it's not. There are elements of contemporary Islam that are threats. Absolutely. Just as there are elements of contemporary Christianity that are threats as well. And this story is not it is not a denial of that. It is not an apology for that either. But it's also not so much about the elements of Islam that we associate with negative things, with like terrorism, which was it was very funny when it landed at number 1 on the Amazon list for books about terrorism. It kind of reinforced the need for this book. That's a whole thing. AI, who needs it? Anyhow, but yeah, I mean, I got tired of it, and I think also I realized myself a couple of things. I realized that I had my own stereotypes about, or I shouldn't say stereotypes, but I had my own ignorance about Islam, and I didn't really appreciate the breadth of it as a extremely diverse community, or extremely diverse religion rather. And I also did not really appreciate the history of Islam in the West. And the more that I did, the more that I felt, for one, the more I felt kind of like rooted in the land here, the more I learned about, my great grandfathers in Saskatchewan and Detroit, and distant relatives who were in Hollywood and were a part of starting the first purpose-built mosque in Canada, the AlRashid here in Edmonton. That made me feel more Canadian, made me feel less, untethered. And but also just learning about it just made me feel like I had stumbled onto something that not a lot of people understood. I consider myself someone who's genuinely, or generally rather, pretty well read on Muslim issues, at least in the West or in North America, and yet it had not occurred to me until, I don't know, 2015, 16, maybe even later, that a huge number of enslaved Africans in the going way back to the 1500s were Muslim people, and not just Muslims, but some of them were scholars. They were imams, faith leaders. They were royal, they came from like royal families of African caliphates. And so just, I felt like I stumbled into something, and if it was amazing me, and if it was making me, feel kind of enlightened, then it should make other people feel enlightened. And that's what I hope to do with this book, is really open people's eyes up to the rich Islamic history of the West that we've never been taught before.
Right. I mean, I can tell you that I felt like that. I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers the series, the original miniseries Roots, which takes us back to slavery in the U.S. and the Muslim, the Muslim antecedents that there are in America. Yeah. But your chapter, that takes us to Brazil, that was amazing history. And, who knew? I certainly didn't know about the Malay uprising. And come on, guys, you guys need to read about it.
And it's just one of many Muslim-led uprisings, too. I mean, the first recorded slave revolt was, for all intents and purposes, a Muslim uprising. That is not to say that, Muslims were, the majority leaders of uprisings. No, but they had an important role in shaping, the new world and our modern societies than we've ever given them credit for, because we've never been taught it. And why haven't we been taught it? What was it, about the historians for hundreds of years that have for whatever reason excluded Islam's role in this? We know about, we generally know a decent amount about Chinese history, about Jewish history, Italian history, but brown history is often completely overlooked. And this isn't to say that it's more important than other, minority faiths' roles in shaping the West, but it is, it's just kind of jarring to me that piece of history has just been erased.
Yeah. I often think about the difference in generations, because when I was growing up in Winnipeg, all of this stuff is like, I didn't know any of this. And I remember going to Andalusia. I think we went about 15 years ago, maybe a little less. And my children were just amazed that, wow, Muslims did all of this. It was just eye-opening for them, because, of course, this is the post 9/11 generation.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, all they know about Muslims is we need to be ashamed, and we need to keep our feet down, and we need to just, be the good Muslim. And that's the narrative that they've learned. So for your book, I mean, it is an absolute primer, because it's just, even though it's so dense, it is just touching the surface of the
Mhm.
richness of Islamic history and culture, and yeah.
And
Um,
what's interesting about Andalusia and Granada in particular is, for a very long time they tried to hide that. Even like contemporarily, they've tried to hide that. They made it very difficult for a contemporary Muslim community to get a mosque and a minaret off the ground. It was only until wealthy, generally Gulf Arabian, people started to travel to Granada, what they call halal tourism, and made it a destination, that they were like, let's run with it. And now if you go to Granada and you see the city's logo, which has been designed for tourists, it's Granada in, like, in Latin script, but it has sort of the flair of Arabic script to look like, oh, you're in Italy, or sorry, you're in Spain, but actually you're in the Middle East. So they've come to like wake up and embrace that, and it's crass, but it's better than nothing. I like that. I like the fact that they are they're kind of doubling down on that like Muslim pride that is needed. I mean, we don't need arrogance of any religious group for the sake of them being arrogant just for the sake of who they are, but it for a massively vilified faith, it can do us all good to sort of give a little bit more weight to the triumphs or to the positives in those communities.
yeah. It takes me back to, I think, that chapter where you talk about, one of the chapters, you talk about the Astral Lab, the
Oh
instrument, the
yes,
ancient
yes, yeah.
instrument. Yeah. So all of that richness of knowledge and ingenuity, I hope that it comes to the forefront again. It's funny, when we were in Spain and we were sitting there and looking at, some of these beautiful towers, and wondering, why does it look so funny? Well, actually, it's because all of the all of the Arabic has been gouged out,
Yeah, yeah,
deliberately so by the Spaniards after they were kicked out in 1492. So
yeah,
talk about actually literal erasure
yep,
of history. Yeah.
yeah.
I want to go on a little bit and talk about some more chapters. So when you visit Detroit, you talk to Rana Abbas Taylor in Dearborn, and she says something really interesting which resonated with me, which is, I want to show everyone, I'm paraphrasing, what a Muslim woman looks like. Can you talk about Muslim women a little bit?
Sure. I mean,
What you find in
I
your
think what she
travels?
says is, I want to defy I want to defy your perception of what a Muslim woman looks like, and get up in your face and screw up your worldview of what you think a
Yes.
Muslim woman looks like. I think that's what she says. Um, and so, sorry, again, your question was,
I want to know what you think about Muslim women and what we should be thinking about Muslim women, because there's a lot of Muslim women out here who
yeah,
um, have been silenced or haven't been heard, and we're
yeah.
here.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I have noticed is that millennial Gen Z Muslim women are increasingly, taking the opportunity, or giving themselves the opportunity to have a little bit more leadership. Um, but it's still a struggle. But they're definitely, I think, being a lot more proactive, and positioning themselves to I think just take up more space, the space that they've always deserved in mosques. Because the fact is, you go to any sort of like average Muslim family, who is it that gets the kids to mosque, or make sure that they get there, or if the kids are enrolled in like an Islamic school or something, who is it that makes sure that happens? It's the mothers. They are the stewards of faith in any family, usually. And yet, the space, or that sort of like religious leadership, ends typically when they reach the mosque. Now, uniquely in Canada, because mosques are nonprofit organizations and they have sort of taken a lot of cues from the way that like other religious organizations are led. Like churches are not just a place to pray. They are often a place with other social services and stuff. So a lot of Canadian mosques provide that as well, and that is typically where you see women in those leadership positions. What I hope to see more of with the age of information, sort of allowing people to have more access to different views. What I'm hoping is that we'll maybe start to see more women faith leaders, which is something that there's a distance to go, but it is starting to happen. There's certainly more like women only mosques, but there is starting to become a small growing movement of like intergender or all the radically inclusive mosques that allow women to lead prayers. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly been an evolution. I remember back in the early 80s, maybe, or the mid 80s, going to my own mosque in Winnipeg that my dad designed, and going there one day, and all of a sudden there's this barrier there.
Yeah.
And
the women in Edmonton had a similar experience like that as well. Yeah. Probably, I think a little bit earlier, maybe in the 70s. At the AlRashid. Might be getting that wrong. Yeah. I think possibly even earlier, but I think because Edmonton had one of the first mosques in Canada, it experienced a lot of that, a lot of the shakeup, of more conservative views being imposed or I want to give the boards a little bit more autonomy, but being embraced, really. Or pressured. I think Edmonton was a little bit earlier with that than some other communities, just because it had the first mosque, and so it was always sort of a bit of a lighthouse for yeah. What's interesting though is if you sorry to but the women, particularly of the AlRashid, have always been so important to that mosque. And starting with the in the 1930s when it was being built, and they were instrumental to the fundraising and organizing of getting that mosque built. And then when they had moved into a multi-million-dollar mosque, what I think at the time was maybe the largest in North America, certainly the largest in Canada at the time in the early 80s. The mostly Lebanese Muslim community was ready to just turn their back on this historic landmark and let it fall in disrepair and get rid of it. And it was again the women who came to the head and preserved it, and it is now in Fort Edmonton Park. It is the first Islamic heritage site in Canada, and that again is because women saw the sort of value in preserving the faith for their communities, for their families, in a way that the men just could not see.
Yeah, I mean, they were an incredibly intrepid group of women who literally made that mosque a part of Canadian history.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And related, of course, to the Canada Council for Muslim Women.
Yeah, exactly.
Through the leadership there.
Yeah. I want to go on, actually it's in the same chapter, that A Tale of Two Mosques. And what struck me about this chapter was, Omar, you keep finding relatives everywhere. Ross, North Dakota, Dearborn, Sao Paulo. I mean, is there anywhere on earth that is have a relative?
California, right? And Los Angeles as well.
And Los Angeles,
yeah.
Was this a quest, or did it somehow become a search for your family inadvertently?
Well, sometimes it was, so my mom was a huge help in this book because no, she certainly didn't know much about our family's history, but she knew people who knew. And so, I would put out feelers and she would help me. And that's how I ended up, knowing about my great grandfathers, who I had no idea had ever lived in the West. But three of the four of them spent some time here during the massive migration of Lebanese in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They've returned around the time of the First World War for a variety of reasons, but they were part of the narrative in this natural way. One of them worked in Ford's original Highlands Park plant, which had a huge Arab community and gave us Dearborn as the Middle East of America. Another one worked on a farm in Saskatchewan, which has ties to the Edmonton Swift Current, North Dakota, Calgary, just the whole syndicate of Prairie Muslims. And then learning that when I interviewed this elderly man in North Dakota, it really just, look, if you're Lebanese and you're Muslim and you're in, this part of the world, it's not going to take long to find some connection. We happen to have a distant relative, but the one that kind of transformed me was learning that I had this distant relative, Frank Lackteen, or Mohammed Lackteen, who was the first Arab American movie star. And a man of consequence. I mean, he was the top villain of the silent era, or at least a small time during the silent era, and had lived an extraordinary and somewhat tragic life as well. And that his story really affected me, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to go back to Frank Lackteen in a moment because I have something I want to discuss with you about him. But before we go there, and I loved what you said about the Prairie Syndicate because I'm part of that Prairie Syndicate.
You are?
And yeah, absolutely. I'm from Winnipeg. And, if you're in Winnipeg, people from Regina come to Winnipeg to shop. I don't know if they still do, but they did because it was the big city. And, if you're on that highway, literally you can't get lost. You're going to get to Regina or they're going to get to Winnipeg. And it's this whole community because, Muslim numbers were really small back then. And this is Canada. For us, distance is nothing. So that I love that phrase, Prairie Syndicate. I want to talk about Houston. So I want to talk about Houston and we're going to talk about good Muslim, bad Muslim, and what's a good enough Muslim. Because you mentioned never being a good enough Muslim, but there's one quotation in that chapter, which is amazing. It's on page 150, where the person who's driving you around Sobia, I think, I don't know if it's you or she who says it, for God's sake, stop serving the FBI, serving the FBI tea, which made me laugh because that's what we do, right? We invite people in, we sit them down, we make tea, we give them some snacks, and we're ready to be the hospitable host. But so the thing about this chapter that really resonated with me is you're talking about model minorities and how that's problematic. You talk again about the good Muslim, bad Muslim. Talk to me about that. What is that all about?
Well, it's so multi-layered, right? So I mean, as you know, in my book, I often try to hold two ideas in my hand or in the reader's head at once. I personally don't feel like there is anything wrong with someone trying to be a model citizen, a model person. But often the motivation for that in racialized communities, and especially in, I think, racialized Muslim communities where there's so much scrutiny already, or at least a sense of scrutiny, whether or not it's real, a lot of the motivation to be a model citizen is actually a motivation to be a model minority. And there's all sorts of problems with it. For one, oftentimes the communities that actually can be what we think of as a model minority community, which is, well integrated, affluent, lots of, a high level of professional degrees, et cetera, et cetera. These are usually immigrants who've already come with a sense of some privilege. Right. So in Houston, this community was very much shaped by the post-65 immigrants, which basically, until 1965, immigration laws in Canada and the US favored white people. Like it was basically designed to favor white people. And then it became more of a meritocracy. But what it ended up doing was favoring the elite, the very, very well-educated people whose families could afford to send them here to work or to get a master's degree or a PhD or something while not working. And so especially with South Asian communities, which is where I put the focus in Houston, it ended up being a bit of a like social experiment, where it becomes this, this largely privileged community that has, they've done well for themselves, but they were already sort of positioned to do well for themselves as long as they had the opportunities, I guess, to go to school and be employed. Which, not that they didn't face, a fair amount of adversity. Of course, they did. And Sobia's family is a little bit different because her family came with the second wave of, from the 80s and 90s. And these were not necessarily the privileged people. These were the privileged people's brothers-in-laws and younger brothers and the ones whose parents never maybe invested in their education. A lot of like sisters, parents not investing in women's educations the same amount. And they would end up being the gas station clerks, the taxi drivers, the restaurateurs, right? I mean, Indian restaurants didn't really exist in large numbers until the 80s and 90s, even though there was huge South Asian, migration in the 60s and 70s. It was that second wave. And so there ends up being a lot of pressure, I think, to live up to the model minority, to live up to the expectations that the first wave had set that foundation for you. And it can sometimes be literally impossible, especially now. Let's move out of South Asian and let's just speak broadly about Muslim immigrants. If you are coming as a war refugee from Syria, Afghanistan, or if you are, inshallah, a Uyghur who was able to escape, a genocide, or a Rohingya who was able to escape genocide, chances are you don't have much to start with. Right. And so you might end up coming to a place, moving into a neighborhood where the expectations for what a good Muslim is, as we were saying before, patriotic, affluent, all sorts of stuff, it's out of your reach. And it may be out of your reach for generations. It may even be largely out of reach for your children. It might be your grandchildren who finally get to sort of, reap those benefits, those rewards. And so just, I think it can cause, a lot of, I guess, almost discrimination within communities. Sometimes a feeling that, you're not doing your part to give us a good name, And then there's another element to it where it doesn't matter, because people are always going to look at you if you're Muslim or you look Muslim. People are always going to just look at you with suspicion. And so in Houston, they do this thing where they, one of the mosques I went to, they randomly give out flowers to strangers to show that they are nice people. And it's sweet, but it's also sad that they would feel that they need to do this. And it is done with the best intentions. It is done to say we come in peace. And you know what? It might actually be benefiting them, and it might be making their lives and their integration smoother. So, I don't want to like detract from them. And also, people who do feel like they need to give Muslim people a good name and be proactive or be activists in that sense, they're doing their part to try to solve a serious problem, which is, Islamophobia. So it's just complicated. And I think a lot of my book's whole point is to say, like, things are complicated.
Yeah. It's just listening to you talk and thinking about that whole good Muslim, bad Muslim, model minority thing. The trouble with that, though, is it really sort of silences us. And I think there's a growing number of people in different generations, probably more in the younger generations than the older, who say, you know what, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
do that anymore. I'm gonna
Yeah.
talk, and I'm going to raise my voice about whatever the issues are: troubles in mosques, in mosque boards, problems within the community, and just in a much more politically dangerous game is writing op-eds, or talking about the fact that the war on terror maybe isn't
Yeah.
wasn't such a great idea, and maybe there are like really complicated geopolitical and historical reasons why there had to be a war on terror. Like,
Or
is it okay to say so? I'm even now, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm thinking, should I be saying this? But I
or
think we're all
shaking
tired
things
of
up
hearing the
or shaking
narrative.
things up in your own community too is it sort of also a form of like activism or just rattling things, because the the good the whole good Muslim bad Muslim binary is it's fraught, and it's also subjective to like who's looking at you, because the thing is, if you try to be a good Muslim to say non-Muslim, like American, white Western eyes, perceptions, and I've defined sort of what that tends to look like. And you are a bad Muslim to a lot of people within your community, or people, maybe Eastern religious authorities, or people from your relatives back home who might be looking at you. And if you
Yeah.
try to be a good Muslim to them, very pious, very observant, maybe you adopt modest dress code, or whatever it may be, then now suddenly you're bad Muslim to the people in the West. And that's sort of that's the catch
Yeah.
22 of it, is that you can't actually you can really only be a good enough Muslim, really.
And even that, you're saying, it's pretty hard to be a good enough Muslim, because you ask yourself, like, am I ever going to be a good enough Muslim? You specifically ask that on page 161. And and I
Yeah.
was left thinking, yeah, exactly. You hit it on the head. Um,
Well, I
I
would like
know
to
I'm a
think
bad
that
Muslim. I know I'm a bad
I
from
would
both
like to
sides.
think, I would like from both sides. Yeah, I might fit that description too. I mean, I would like to hope, I hope that people who read this book, Muslim people who read this book, will leave it feeling like I'm a good enough Muslim. I can be Muslim on my own terms, and that there are so many different expressions of Islam. What is a Muslim anyway? I must fit some definition of it. Maybe I just don't need to think about it so much and just focus on being a good person with these Muslim values, ethics that I was raised with, and that is good enough. Islam should just be in the heart of the individual, and that's what I hope is the takeaway.
Okay. I'm going to ask you one more question. After that, if you want to do a second reading, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So the question I wanted to ask you is, it's about Los Angeles, and you're talking about Frank Lackteen, the most
Mm-hmm.
villainous of all the screen villains. And you write that you were disappointed with your ancestor, Frank
Mm-hmm.
Lackteen, who never used his platform to correct misconceptions, but only perpetrated stereotypes. And
Yeah.
that really struck me, because as you say, he was a man who had a fascinating life story, but it was also very tragic. And it made me wonder, what was his responsibility to
Yeah.
correct? Did he actually have a responsibility? Did he have the platform to do it? And
I think so. I think so. Look, there's a difference between, an unduly burden on Muslim people to speak for all Muslims, apologize for all Muslims. There's a difference between that and someone who is a movie star, often cast as an Arab, a Muslim, a Middle Eastern, or South Asian. He was also cast as just like basically everything because he was ethnically ambiguous. But there was a big chunk of his career where he was basically a Muslim archetype, and he did have an opportunity to try to present them in some better way,
yeah.
or at least to speak to.
I keep thinking
At
that
least
maybe
he
he
at,
didn't
at
have
least
as
he could
much
speak
power as
to
he
the.
thought.
Yeah, he also was, I think, disempowered in a lot of ways too. At the maybe at the height of his career, I think he had maybe uh, which is the silent area. He had a better opportunity to maybe make some career choices, or to at least speak out in the way that, like, Anna May Wong, Stephen Fetchit, like several of his racialized contemporaries, Rudolph Valentino, who was an Italian who would play an Arab, he had more positive things to say, and made more of a genuine attempt to debunk Islamophobia, or, like, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim tropes. He made more of an attempt to do that in media than Frank Lackteen did. Frank Lackteen played up his Middle Eastern ethnicity, not necessarily in a negative way, but he told what I believe are lies. He would say that my family I come from a from a family of Oriental rug makers, and he just he kind of embellished that part of him a little bit. But I think there were opportunities for him to say, like, yeah, I might play a scary Arab, or a scary, Native American, or a scary Chinese, Chinese opium dealer, whatever it was. I may play these people, but that's not the reality of it. It's just a character, and in reality, these people, my people, their people, are wonderful. He did not really do that, and in fact, he participated in propaganda films that actually probably made it harder for him to become an American. He applied to be an American citizen, I think, 3 times before he was finally accepted, which is wild because he was, at one point he might have been a household name. And he was willing to throw every minority, immigrant community under the bus for fame, fortune, but also, I would think, for citizenship. And he couldn't get it.
Wow. Yeah, that is so ironic. And given his legacy in Hollywood, I can see your point. Because Hollywood is still using those tropes,
Yeah.
and still, ka-ching at the bank and making money off those stereotypes. So I think, Omar, if you wanted to do your second reading,
Sure,
you could
let's
do
do
that
it.
now, and then we'll
And
go
I
to
think
Q&A.
I think I hear biryani, by the way.
Great.
None of you can leave until I have had my biryani. All right. I'm going to read from the last chapter, which is called Who is Muslim? And it is about the Al-Tahid Juma Circle Unity Mosque in Toronto, sometimes known as the Gay Mosque. And in general, it's just kind of about the queer Muslim movement. The last thing I expected to see at Friday prayer was a bowl of packaged condoms. Are you here for Unity Mosque? The secretary asked. It's in the boardroom down the hall. Of the dozens of congregations that I'd met since 2017, none were as adaptive, alternative, and radically inclusive as Al-Tawhid Juma Circle, better known as Unity Mosque. The prayer hall is discreet and nomadic, roving between borrowed spaces to protect its many lesbian, gay, transgender, two-spirited, and non-binary worshippers, hence why we had met inside of a community center in downtown Toronto. Other times they might meet in high-rise offices. Hello. You could just put that on the floor and I'll come get my food like a prisoner. Just slip it through the crack. There's a lot of food here. Wow. Thank you. Just drop it there. Thank you. Oh God. I'll get to that food in question period. I just lost a feed. Are you still there? Yes, you are. Okay. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Yes. The smell of this delicious food is just wafting through the air right now.
You're just going to have to wait a little bit.
All right. Now I can't wait to finish this reading. All right. So this is why they met, why we had met inside of a community center in downtown Toronto. Other times they meet in high-rise offices, churches, conference halls, and living rooms. And sometimes it's all of those simultaneously. More meme than mosque, Juma Circle groups organized in 10 North American cities and inside bedrooms worldwide via Facebook Live. These Muslims in Netherlands and Pakistan, the Middle East, and the West Coast set their clocks to Toronto time, prostrating in seemingly random directions in sync toward the same speck of Earth. Some of the traditions will appear foreign to them, but that's the truth. But that's true for everyone entering the prayer space for the first time. It's a mix of so many different traditions, Muslim, Eastern, and Western traditions, and indigenous traditions, that it challenges everyone's comfort zones. Would it also challenge mine, I wondered, as I turned away from the bowl of condoms toward the prayer space. Often called the gay mosque, members prefer inclusive mosque. You do not have to be queer or Muslim to join a Juma Circle, but you do have to prove yourself an ally to an exclusive Facebook group with 2,000 members. Unity Mosque co-founder Ferrukh Faruqui pointed me toward this private group before I could obtain the secret address. To access the group, I answered a questionnaire about my opinions on 3 major issues. Am I comfortable with the notion of women or non-heterosexual people leading my prayer? Yes. Am I comfortable praying with mixed genders, denominations, and people who may not necessarily identify as Muslims? Definitely yes. What's my opinion on Black Lives Matter, environmental stewardship, and Indigenous self-determination movements? I filled it out and applied, thinking that I may have finally met my people. But when I started to read members' comments and look at their photos, I had good reason to question that assumption. The most engaged members revealed themselves to be refugees, immigrants, and outcasts, people who may not actually prefer the Unity Mosque, but who need it for safety and well-being. Stepping inside the mosque on that Friday in late February, I had a feeling that I'd be the most privileged person in the congregation, which really is not that unusual for a Canadian-born, middle-class, straight-passing male. Unless I met another able-bodied straight dude who was also 1 shade lighter than Caramel and an inch taller than Tom Cruise, I would probably be that dude. And I'd likely take up more space regardless because Imam Kaki had permitted me to document the circle and meet its members. And you'll have to, I guess, buy or get your hands on the book to find out who those people are. Should I grab some food and come right back?
Grab your food and come back.
Right.
Show everyone your plate of biryani so I can prove, Omar, that you're eating biryani. And then we're going to get started with the Q&A.
Wowzers!
I'm so glad it got there.
What have you done? Thank you so much for this.
Send me blessings. Send the CCMW Ottawa blessings, and we will be happy. So
All right.
I'm just looking at some of the comments and the questions. Here is a comment. Ferrukh, you're a bad Muslim in the best way. You're a Muslim woman who thinks critically. Thank you so much for that, Fazia. Question. So, the print is just a little bit fuzzy, so I'm going to do my best to read. Who are literary writers, Omar, and would you say that you are one?
I think of myself as a literary journalist. You know, what I do is first and foremost journalism, but I try to make it educational, but also accessible. I studied film, which I think maybe has a lot to do with my style of writing, which is to sort of make everything feel like it is documentary style. And, you know, in a sense that is actually kind of a literary device to sort of make the reader feel like they are reading a story that is sort of unraveling in the present moment, as opposed to some research that I'd done in the past. So, yeah.
Well, if I can comment on that a little bit, I think
you sure
especially
can.
the chapter.
Oh, I eat this samosa.
Yeah, have a samosa. Yeah, especially, I mean, there's so many examples, but one that just springs up to me now is when you're talking about, I'm going to go back to the Mayan Muslims again, because one of the first, I'm going to find it if you give me 1 second. It is at the
Take your
very
time.
beginning of the.
Now it's just
at the
me
very
eating and
beginning.
you looking through a book. Are you all entertained?
The name of the book is, the name of the chapter is Expelled, I believe. And yeah, here it is. So here is one of the very first sentences. Perched atop a plateau in the dead center of the Chiapas Highlands, the Mayan power capital is surrounded by forested hill peaks, resembling the heads of prostrating green-haired giants. So I underlined that because it's such a vivid image, of this place. And as you go on, I just feel like we're immersed in this country and in this culture. And that's one of the key devices, right, of someone who's a literary writer.
Thank you. I mean, that's what I hope is the effect, right? Do I always succeed at it? No. But I hope that that's what I will do, is make people feel immersed in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from Alia Hogben. Hi, Alia. I hope you're doing well.
Alia, hello.
Please explain the significance of the title of your book. Thank you.
A few people have asked me that. Actually, it probably comes up every book event now. Well, look, people from the West, Muslims or not, think of Muslims as praying to the East. But of course, Muslims pray toward Mecca. Right. But one of the, something I wanted with this book is I wanted people to know absolutely immediately that this was going to turn perceptions and stereotypes on their heads. So what better way to do that than to convey that, instead of, Muslims who typically pray to the East from here are praying to the West. Now the prayer it's a different kind of prayer. It is a prayer of, often of investing your hopes and dreams, your future, and if not your future, your children's future, their security on a new home in the West. Because most Muslims here are immigrants, migrants. And so, the act of, and even if they're not, even if they're Black Muslims, or if we're talking about enslaved or indentured Indians, by being an integral part of this, and by choosing to live here, you are, in a sense, I think, kind of preying on the Western world to uplift you, to give you the to give you the life that you hope for yourself and for your family. And so, to me, that is like a prayer in itself. So that is sort of like the double meaning behind the title.
Okay. Another question from, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Akinwande Victoria. How many books have you written, Omar?
Um, I consider this my first book, but some would say I've written 5 books. This is the first book that feels like it comes from my heart and not someone else's heart. I've co-authored a book. I've ghostwritten 2 books as well. And here it is. About 14 years ago, I got a job off of Craigslist to write a book called Amazing Cats, which is technically my first book. But obviously this one did not come from my heart and soul. So, I'm 5 books in, but actually I do think of this one as my first book.
Yeah, you've put you have turned your heart and your life inside out for this book, and I'm saying that in the best possible way. I mean, the passion, it clearly comes through. Next question from Torrin Smith. How long was the process of doing research, writing, and publishing your book?
4.5 years. I think the book, the first conversation that I had probably with my agent about it was sometime between January 2017, the Quebec City mosque shooting, and the trip in Inuvik, which was in April, so probably around February, March. The idea of doing a book that told an alternative history of the Americas through Muslim lenses, that kind of came about then. I spent about from April 2017 to December of 2019, right before the pandemic, traveled, probably was on a plane once a month. Was gone a lot. I would typically try to put the trips together. So, in order to save costs, if I'm going to Trinidad, it's a good time to go to Houston because there's a layover there. That kind of stuff. If I'm going to LA, I went to Mexico on the same trip because I'm already sort of close. I'm closer to there, about halfway there. So yeah, I think, 4.5. I spent a year rewriting it. Once I had the first draft, I took another go of it. It's just part of the process. So
yeah. Can you speak a little bit to how you finance doing your research?
Oh, we're getting into that kind of stuff. Yeah, sure. I mean, an advance is an advance, and here's the biryani. Oh, habibi. There we go. Woo. The advance is the advance, but then there's also, and it's never enough, even though it was a decent amount. But I financed it in a number of ways. One was that I would sell articles. As a travel writer, I could sell travel articles in certain places when I would go there to do my research, and that would help me. Ferrukh, are you still there? I think I may have lost you. Yeah. Okay. Good. You're frozen, but I'm happy to hear your voice. So yeah, the trip to Houston, I sold a travel article to a men's magazine that allowed me to cover the flights and the hotel, some of the meals. I did the same thing in Trinidad with a newspaper. The Frank Lackteen Los Angeles trip, I financed that by selling a longer story about Frank Lackteen to a pop culture magazine. So there's a number of that, but also I was lucky enough to get some support from Alberta Foundation for the Arts, Edmonton Heritage Council, and the Edmonton Arts Council. So and then some of it I just paid out of pocket, which hoping that with time selling excerpts and stuff it'll pay it off.
Yeah. I mean that goes to the sort of difficult part, right, of the writer's life is the finances don't always add up. And you've written this book that is obviously, very, very close to your heart. But it would be great, right, if artists and writers could be compensated. Yeah. Mike, can you
Absolutely.
please?
And now is probably as good of a time as any to say that, like, the support that I got from my family, and not just my wife, but the women in my life, my mother with childcare, my wife with looking after our daughter, my daughter with her patience and forgiveness for me to be gone for like a quarter of the first 2 years of her life. That
Right.
to me is like much more valuable than the money itself. It was a lot easier to do that travel just knowing that I was being supported in doing it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, that moral support is so crucial. We have another question from Mohammed
This is
Ehsan.
delicious.
Is an audio version of the book coming as well?
Not that I know of. But if
Maybe
you,
soon, hopefully,
inshallah,
inshallah.
um, yeah, not that I know of though. I would love to do one. I mean, I would love someone else to do it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, we can hope and we can say inshallah. Mike, can you scroll down to more questions?
I love that there are so many questions. Pardon me.
So there's a question from Fazia, and you've addressed it somewhat, Omar, already in your second reading. But Fazia Talib is saying that she's saying, "Congratulations, Omar! My copy's waiting for me at my favorite independent bookstore. I heard you speak briefly about your experience at the Unity Mosque. I'm part of the Unity Mosque Ottawa as well as the CCMW. Can you share that Unity Mosque experience with us? Thank you."
That was I think I had a lot of like really enlightening experiences in this book. But I can't say that I had many spiritual experiences. That I think was one of them. That to me it opened my eyes up to um, just how strong that pull for for spiritual comfort is with people who had, you know and I include myself, among them, but I think their motivations were much stronger. People who had no reason to still have any faith, certainly no reason to have any faith in Islam, given that they attribute Islamic Islamic religious rules and what they learned was haram for a lot of their own strife and difficulties in life. And yet, obviously, there was something much bigger than and it almost is fed actually by a lot of the strife that they've experienced in their lives, whether they are refugees or sort of disowned by their families, or they just feel like they can't live an open, gay life and happiness. That those challenges, I think, probably actually feed the need for spiritual comfort. And anyway, they seek it out, they need it, and they find it, and they find it with other people who often don't have, in a way, they don't have that much in common with each other, except for the fact that in one way or another they are a misfit or an outlier. Why should I feel like I have a bond with a lesbian, a lesbian from Central Africa, a refugee from Central Africa who left because her family was trying to force her into a heterosexual marriage? Well, we felt bonded, or I've certainly felt bonded to her, because we both know what it is like to feel like an outlier, like a black sheep in your family, to feel like you have to live your life in some sort of secrecy, that you can't just be who you are. And that's what I loved about Unity Mosque, is it was just the most authentic experience for me, because I just felt like everyone here could just be who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and reading that chapter, there's so many ways to be an outsider.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at something that you wrote in that chapter about, I think, when you told your parents that you don't really believe. You write that my dad fell silent and my mom was visibly crushed, but also you still had dinner with them, and your life went on. But you do talk about the Muslims'
Yeah.
double life, and you write very movingly about her name is, I'm going to hopefully pronounce the name correctly, Nata Natukunda, the lady who fled
Yeah.
Central Africa. And you're wondering why she doesn't have resentment, or why she still wants to be part of Islam.
Yeah.
And her answer is so moving because, people have multiple identities. And
Yeah.
I think, no matter who you are, you have a spiritual need inside you, and you need a place to be
Yes.
able to share that spirituality.
Yeah. And I think everyone's entitled to that place. And now the question is, are they entitled to find it in a mosque? Are they entitled to? Man, I don't know. I like Islam is going to be what people want it to be. I think what's important is that if people who have that spiritual need, if their idea of spirituality and life and what gives life meaning comes from an Islamic framework, then they are entitled to build a mosque that caters to members like them. That's what I think that they're entitled to have.
Yeah, and that whole word entitled is a very loaded word, um,
Well, as humans, we
because
are entitled to certain to certain things.
yeah,
I don't.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't want to use it in sort of in the way that I don't know millennials are entitled to avocados or however
hmm
it's typically
yeah,
used.
yeah. I mean, and that's, and the I mean, entitled can mean many things, but um, just like we said before, like, you've reiterated that everyone has a spirituality inside them, however they choose to express it, and with whoever they choose to express it. And if they don't find that place in a conventional mosque, well, the conventional mosques, as I've, the women have left mosques in droves.
Yes.
Women have been unmosqued,
Yeah.
definitely in North America, and which is really sad in a way for the mosques themselves and for the communities. But when you become a very sort of homogenous community, where people can't be themselves, or they
Yeah.
can't bring their own talents to make that community even more dynamic and rich and strong than it was before, then I think that's I think that's a really sad thing. And
It is.
I
And I think that they will have to adapt to the values of younger Muslim people, and they will have to adapt to to not just accept openly gay people, but actually, care for them and their needs. And I think they will get there. But as some of the people I interviewed in that chapter point out, they will probably get there because of the mothers and teachers and parents, and they will get there because it'll be grassroots. It'll be the congregation itself that demands this kind of inclusivity. It's not going to get there, I think, because of a religious leader. Certainly not.
mhm,
And I don't know if it'll necessarily get there because of an organization like Shema Circle or Unity Mosque. I think it has to come from the congregation itself, and I think it will. I see it in my own parents. I see it in a lot of first generation Canadians, how they, with time, will start to meet their children's values. They will start to adopt them a little bit more as they become forced to confront differences of opinions of living life, of what is acceptable. um,
mhm,
their only choice becomes to accept it because they love their children unconditionally, or to inflict pain on the children, and no parent ever wants to do that. And honestly, what I've learned from my own parents is that I overestimate, I think, their I overestimate, or sorry, I underestimate how tolerant really they are. Tolerant of myself and my, my difference of opinions of life. I'm seeing that right now with this book out. I wondered, how will it be accepted? How will I be accepted? I'm being accepted. I'm being accepted.
Have they read your book?
In the process of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I get an opinion, I'll replace Desmond Cole's quote on the cover with my mother's.
Okay. Yeah, your mother, it definitely, runs through this. And I was going to talk about Burger Baron if we had a few minutes, but before we get there, I just wanted to talk briefly about the chapter on the Moorish people in Chicago. That whole chapter in Chicago was just endlessly fascinating to me because I had never heard of that community before. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about that community in Chicago and why they rejected being called Black Muslims?
Let's see, we got about 9 minutes.
We can go a little bit over.
So the Moorish Science Temple and Moorish Americans, they are often qualified as quasi-Muslim, but they consider themselves Muslims. They believe in, one God, Allah, and Muhammad as his messenger. They also believe that Noble Drew Ali, who is a Black American, was also a messenger as well. Now, they would not call him Black because they deny and actually forbid the term Black, as well as African American, Negro, colored. It comes from the Jim Crow era, which is why you have language around that kind of language in their laws. But essentially, it was a movement that was, despite being like Black denialism, it was Black empowerment, because what they called themselves were Moors, and they believed in an origin story of themselves as being descendants of the glorious, ancient Moors, the Muslim Moors. Now, in their idea of in their alternative history, the Moors also were, they also ruled West Africa. They also ruled the Americas. That is what they believe, which also makes them indigenous as well, indigenous Americans. And this was the first, Noble Drew Ali, their prophet, was the first American, or he was the first person to tailor Islam to the needs of Americans. And from it grew the Nation of Islam. Like the founder of the Nation of Islam, there's good evidence to believe that he was one of the earliest members of the Moorish Science Temple. And so he this seed that he planted is the reason why there is 500,000 Black Muslims in the United States today. But most curiously, since the internet age, since sort of the rise of social media and YouTube and stuff, it is having a resurgence because the beliefs have somehow been preserved over the years, but now they are being sort of resuscitated, through a younger generation, often attracted to sort of fringier things, but nonetheless, it is having a very curious revival in America right now.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, that whole history is amazing, and it takes
it's so
me.
interesting.
That's what I'm saying. That could be a book on its own.
Well, it is. You will find some books on more science on its own, though often through a historical lens. What I think people didn't realize is that this is actually that there is a contemporary movement, and it might actually be, bigger than ever.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple more questions here from Ali Raza. How has writing this book
Hi,
shown you
Ali.
a better?
Sorry, I
How
cut
has writing?
you off to say hello. What was the last
Oh,
part?
that's okay. How has writing this book shown you a better, more constructive way to be critical of religion, Islam in
Mm,
particular, without hurtful sentiments?
that's a really good question. Because I do, I do want to be critical of power, of leadership, of mosque boards are made up of all sorts of personalities, and sometimes people drawn to it for all the right reasons, and sometimes people not. And I still need to be able to be critical when needed. So, how do I, or the sort of the Salafi movement, and the more importantly the sort of like extremist, violent contingent of the Salafi movement. For those who don't know, Salafi is sort of like ultra orthodox Islam. I think that I want to have conversations about these things, but I also didn't want to perpetuate the stereotypes. So I think that the way to do it it's quite simple actually. You let members of the community speak. You don't speak around them. Now, I do editorialize. I do try to, sort of glom together some big ideas and try to give my perspective, sort of for sake of transparency, but also just for sake of just being your guide on this tour. But the best way to confront these issues is to just talk to people in the community who recognize them for what they are and want to have a say. And they always have something very intelligent, cogent to say, that they are the ones who have the capacity to talk about, to be critical without being, without vilifying, right? Because it's their community, and they have a bigger stake in this than anyone else.
So I have another question, and then I want to go to Burger Baron. I really want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. So, question from Mohammed Ehsan. Well, he says you should give voice to your own book. His questions are: what's your next project? A, and B, any backlash on the book from the so-called moderate segment of the community?
That's funny.
So, next project.
That's funny that you would ask. I'll do the backlash first.
Okay.
A little bit. And it's not coming from who I thought it would come from. I thought it was going to come from more of the ultra-Orthodox community who would say that, Islam is not subjective. Duh. A Muslim is someone who proclaims God as the one and only God, Muhammad as his messenger, and does these 5 daily prayers. It's not complicated, it's stupid. That's what I expected. That's not what I'm getting. The backlash, as you very wisely predicted, and I don't know why, because it certainly surprised me, is coming from the moderate, or let's just say the progressive. I'll say the moderate, who I think just, they don't want, the book's just not what they wanted it to be for whatever reason. The fact that I'm critical of the Aga Khan in my chapter about Ismailis, and that I'm critical of I guess the lack of transparency that with which they treat the public that might have questions about their faith. Certainly that's how I was treated. And sort of the wishy-washiness around about homosexuality. So that's, very particular to that chapter. And, I think people who wanted this to be an activist book, who, didn't want me to, explore the realities of radicalism, which I do a little bit, but I do very early on in the book in Trinidad, because you just can't ignore it there. I think, is what it is. I think that, time will probably show that this is a bit of a polarizing book, that for believers, it is, it's going to disappoint a lot of them. Because, as I said before, I tend to try to hold two ideas in my head at once. That, I think, is life. That's the reality of life. There's never, and nothing is ever perfectly positive. Everything always has another side to it. And I think that in an era where people just want like a clean take, that is disappointing. One of the critiques that I read was that this book was a series of convoluted takes. Well, a series of convoluted takes. Well, I think that comes from the fact that I don't have, a lot of like firm opinions, that I often say on one hand this, but on the other hand that.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that I'm surprised too, that that's where the backlash came from. I mean, I read that chapter on the Ismaili community, and I also thought, wow, Omar is going bravely into new territory here, because, again, it brings us back to misrepresentation and what we owe our communities, in terms of not criticizing each other and not being too critical, not holding each other to account. So, and the fact that you went there and you talked about some of the things that you see as problematic, good for you, Omar, but I'm sorry you're facing backlash, but maybe that means that you had something really important to say.
I think so.
Maybe
I mean,
a good thing.
I would rather there be, I don't want I don't want to be crucified for my book, but I would rather there be some negative response than not, because I think that means that I've written a book of some substance.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the way I mean it. That you've written a book that's complex and that makes us think.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about Burger Baron briefly, because I have to talk about Burger Baron. So I've been.
You may have to define Burger Baron for people outside of Alberta.
I will. So Burger Baron is Burger Barons are a group of restaurants, mostly in small town Alberta, but at one time they were in the States, and I'm not sure there's still one in Rocky Mountain in what's the one in BC?
One in Kelowna. It's in Kelowna.
Oh, there's one in Kelowna. Okay. So these are a group of restaurants. They're burger joints, and they're run by mostly Lebanese, Canadians, and some Palestinian communities. Some
one Palestinian family.
Okay. And it is just the most joyous romp of Canadiana. So he's got family history, friendship, scene upon scene of oozy, juicy hamburgers dribbling down the person's chin. And then you've got these scenes. I love these scenes of you driving along these empty highways in rural Alberta, highways flanked by these mysterious pine forests, juxtaposed with grainy black and white footage of the Lebanese Civil War. And the other thing I loved was those family pictures. So here's where I want to talk about your mom. Your mom is gorgeous, and she still is.
I'll pass that on. She's beautiful.
But what made you decide to do this feature? Because again, Omar, I mean, we can't ignore the similarities, right, between the two projects. You're going into heritage, and you're going into family history, and you're positing Muslims and that community as an integral part of the Canadian establishment.
Well, you just answered it for me, so thank you. I've never been able to answer it as cogently as you did, but that is what they have in common. Both the book and the movie are, trying to, I guess, show the unsung legacies of racialized communities in The Last Baron, which is the documentary about burger barons. It is about the Lebanese diaspora of Alberta. Very, 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 very specific. And with this book, it is about many, many Muslim diasporas and communities throughout the the entire Western Hemisphere. But they are ultimately trying to, do the same thing, and in a very personal way. My parents owned a Burger Baron in High Prairie, Alberta. It took a very long time for me to realize that it was not actually a franchise. It was more of a meme, and that everyone who was a part of this like syndicate was Lebanese, like my parents. And so I've always known that is fascinating, and I've always wanted to know why. And so the opportunity came up to pitch a documentary to CBC, and this is what I wanted it to be about. And I just knew that people would respond to it positively once they saw it. Though I also knew that a lot of people on the surface, on the pitch, would be confused by it. It's like, so sorry, you want to make a documentary about like a small town burger chain like that? I'm sorry, that doesn't sound that interesting. But once you put it in perspective and you show just how many hundreds and hundreds of Lebanese families, many of them Civil War refugees, have had an opportunity at a better life because of this humble burger joint that went rogue, and they were able to do whatever they wanted with it. I think it changes people's minds. I forgot to answer a question previously, which is, what is your next project? This is actually my next project, is to turn this into a feature film. So it's a 45-minute documentary on CBC Gem that you can watch in Canada, but there's a lot more to the story that we weren't able to tell in just that time. So we've been fundraising through an Indiegogo, which is like a Kickstarter for artists. So if you search The Last Baron feature film, you'll see that we have a crowdfunding campaign right now. And we just need about $15,000 to finish it. And then hopefully with that, we'll be able to take it to the international market, and especially the Middle East. I would really, really love this film to get, Arabic subtitles, and then to play in throughout the Middle East, and especially in Lebanon. That would be my dream. So that's what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah, because it's not just about Alberta. It's about
it's about Lebanon. It's about the United States. It's yeah, it's got a lot to it.
It's an international story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time. So I want to remind everyone, please buy your book from Perfect Books if you're here in Ottawa. Please watch The Last Baron. And if you're lucky enough to live in Alberta, go and eat a burger and think of me while you're eating your burger.
And thank you so much for all this beautiful food. This is delicious. I need to know where this is from.
Hold it up a little bit more so we can see it. Hold it up a little. There you go.
It's genuinely delicious. It's so good. I've never heard of Aisha's Kitchen. I'll tell you, she has a customer for life, Aisha.
Okay, well, I had fun Googling all the places
Mashallah,
where you can get biryani in Edmonton, and there's a lot of places, and next time I'm in Edmonton, I know where to go to eat.
All right, we'll go to Aisha's together. Thank you for being a wonderful host, Farukh. Before I forget, the wonderful conversation. You were excellent.
I had a ball. I want to thank Sean and Neil Wilson and Mike of the Ottawa International Writers Festival for their support in making this virtual Books and Biryani happen. And I want to thank Omar for many things, but among them making the difficult physical and metaphysical journey that he undertook, and for writing this book, because writing books is hard. And I think that there's the message in this book, I think, is something that belongs to all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of us. Thank you to everyone for joining us. See you next year at Books and Biryani.
Yeah. Thank you to the Canada Council for Muslim Women. It's an honor to be your guest. It really is.
Thank you. It's been great having you.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.